الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين نستعينه نحمده ونستعينه ونستنصره ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأن محمدا عبده ورسوله اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد كما صليت على إبراهيم وآل إبراهيم إنك حميد مجيد ورضي الله عن المهاجرين والأنصار ربنا إننا سمعنا مناديا ينادي للإيمان أن آمنوا بربكم فآمنا ربنا فاغفر لنا ذنوبنا وكفر عنا سيئاتنا وتوفنا مع الأبرار بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. With knowledge comes aspiration and power. With power comes the propensity for a lack of gratitude. With a lack of gratitude comes self-centrism. With self-centrism comes amorality. And with amorality comes destruction. This is not new news. It's nearly a year old, 10 months to a year old. But there was a report that was written by Yuval Abraham, an investigative report, published in the Plus 972 magazine, called Lavender, the AI machine directing Israel's bombing spree in Gaza. In it, he talks about the incorporation of the Israeli military, or the Israeli military's incorporation of AI systems in their warfare, their genocidal war, carried out against the people of Palestine, and indeed the people of Lebanon. And he writes about AI technologies, American-produced AI technologies, using Google Images and Microsoft and OpenAI, which once upon a time used to be a non-profit organization who part of their bylaws said that none of their technology is meant to harm anyone. They later rescinded that and said that their standards then just opened themselves up to some murky legalese language that allowed essentially for Israel to carry out the bombing campaign that they did. But he writes that AI technologies like Lavender, one program, or Where is Daddy is the name of another technology, are designed to be game changers for the slow processes of warfare. These AI technologies produce targets at a much faster rate. The idea being that fast, streamlined warfare will overwhelm the enemy and thus be more effective than a more drawn-out operation for the sake of careful discernment. Where is Daddy? You might wonder, what does that title refer to? Where is Daddy, in particular, is designed to track targets to their family residence and then bomb them there. It's not designed to track the targets when they leave their family home and then bomb them carefully so as to avoid the collateral damage of the family of the target. And we could say a lot about how these targets are selected, mind you, in a very general way, not with discernment and specific intelligence. No, the point is to kill the operative or the target, if they are indeed Hamas or not, or even remotely affiliated with Hamas, and their family, and the buildings. 70%, it's estimated, of the buildings in Gaza have been demolished. Low-level targets are allotted a kill ratio of 20 civilians. Low-level targets. That could be anybody. Battalion or brigade commanders, those types of targets, were caused to kill over 100 civilians per target as per the parameters of the program, which we watched happen in Shuja'iyya and some of the other areas numerous times. Or even when they went to try to rescue they used the port that they put there for humanitarian purposes and then got into the aid trucks and then shot up an entire civilian populated area and killed hundreds and injured over 1,000 in order to extract the 2-3 prisoners of war that they had intelligence about. But psychologically, there's a very major point here to consider. The reason we know about any of this information is because Israeli operators of these technologies told this reporter this information. One said that in a bombing of a commander, they, quote, knew that it would kill over 100 civilians. They knew that it would kill over 100. And then he says, the operative himself, for me, psychologically, it was unusual. Over 100 civilians crosses some red line. Yuval Abraham correctly reports that at the beginning of this genocide, it was made immediately clear that the international law of proportionality had been rendered totally meaningless. In order to do so, Israel overwhelmed their own military officers. How? By giving them thousands of pending targets developed all by AI technology. All that was left was to push the button. You know that overwhelming feeling you have when you've let your emails get away from you? Trash, 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 trash. So what do you think they did when all was left was to push the button? They pushed it. The AI gave them the license to tell themselves that international law and basic morality had been calculated and vetted by a computer. No point in arguing. If you carefully comb through each target selection, then you are bottlenecking. And that is a waste of American taxpayer money. Remember? This was the whole reason. I didn't bring the book because I just ordered it, but there is an Israeli commander or general or whatever that goes around talking about how AI is the future and we need to invest in AI. Why? because AI is what gets rid of the bottleneck of warfare. At the beginning, we said the bottleneck of warfare is discerning targets to minimize casualties and adhere to international law, at least by appearance. But AI gets rid of this bottleneck because you just plug in the parameters of, oh, international law. But the parameters are 20 civilians for a low-level target. That could be somebody who rides a bike. I don't know, that it transfers information. Allegedly, we don't even know for certain whether that person is in fact doing something materially substantial for Hamas or not. Doesn't matter. AI gave them the license to tell themselves that international law and basic morality had been calculated and vetted by the computer. No point in arguing. If you carefully comb through each target selection, then you are the bottleneck. You will be blamed for the bottleneck when you've been given this magic technology that can win you the war without even thinking. Palestinians and Lebanese became as if mere ants under the magnifying glass of a deranged child. This semester, I have the unique opportunity of auditing the Sheikh's class on international human rights. Pray for him. What a time to teach a course like that. And the feeling of these students is palpable in this class. And I have to say, the students are remarkably impressive. They're very smart. And they do their homework. And finally, one of the students during class had a moment in which he had some sort of an emotional release, kind of like a moral emotional release. And he brought to mind what many in the class were thinking. And what he said was very along the lines of, this is so hard for me to understand how international law and being an international lawyer, how do I take this seriously? Maybe, and then he tried to qualify it because he understood what he was saying and that it was hard to swallow. He said, maybe it does certain things, I don't know. I learned a lot in this class and I'm deeply appreciative, and it's been very enlightening and important for me personally. But I think what I've learned is this type of lawyering isn't for me. Now, you as a teacher, how do you respond to this? As someone who has spent an entire lifetime dedicated to this facet of law, in order to set things right, I learned a great deal in that exchange. This is a patient teacher. A moral teacher. Maybe I'll read from this book instead to make it easier to convey what it is that I wish for you to know. This push and pull is not dating only back as far as 2020 or 2010. This goes back to the very inception of international law and the laws of war. the 1800s, the late 1800s, the early 1900s. People like H.G. Wells insisted in 1919, this is a book from a book called Humane, How the United States Abandoned Peace and Reinvented War by Samuel Moyn. It says that H.G. Wells says in 4 brief years, in 1919, Europe was compelled to develop a warfare monstrously out of proportion to any conceivably good which the completest victory would possibly achieve for the other side. If that was so, quote, all Geneva conventions and such palliative ordinances, though excellent in intention, and good in their immediate effects, make ultimately for the persistence of war as an institution. This is interesting, the persistence of war as an institution. I think that is the root of the emotion that is frustrating the students in this class. Another commentator was brutal about how and where the demand to end brutality had led. Quote, the failure of international law is due to the failure of the statesmen and jurists of the last century to use the moral forces of their day for the development of international law along the lines of true progress. And this is in turn due to their preoccupation with the laws of war. If international law was to be relevant again, it would have to be a law of peace. Quincy Wright, another international law commentator here, says, he didn't go as far as to blame humane war for endless war, but it was clear to him that if international law did not institutionalize peace, it was not worth much. He says that the war has shown that international law cannot greatly reduce the destructiveness of war in 1920. This is how he feels. If so, the effort of international law to regulate war was of slight practical value, and international law must more seriously devote itself to the regulation of the conditions which led to war and the elimination of war itself. Indeed, these are some cogent and brilliant arguments as old as 1920. The book goes on to explain about a significant amount of historical evidence that shows that at the onset of the Geneva Convention and the laws of war and implementations, that it seemed to have little to no effect on Arab or Muslim or African populations, and that there would be wars, in, for example, the English versus the Sudanese, that would wipe out tens of thousands in a single night of battalions, individual military soldiers, and England would virtually lose none. It was a grotesque lack of proportionality. But then how do you answer this question to the student as the teacher? You see, this is the crux of the answer that the teacher gave. And I am adding my own interpretation. International law may not currently be the direct vehicle to end and abolish war. But what does it do? It gives the moral warrant for the need of a cultural paradigm shift away from war as a necessary human institution. As we, human beings, develop morally and develop insaniya, humanness, moral humanness, developed moral humanness, we will naturally traverse the path towards moral civilizational balance and equity. And given the fact that we are a day away from the holy month of Ramadan, this is, in fact, the spirit of the holy month of Ramadan. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم وأسأل الله يستجب لكم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. سبحان رب العزة عما يصفون. والسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين. This is the month of the Quran, and I want to connect the first sermon to the second sermon with the three-part narrative of Sulaiman alayhi salam in Surah An-Naml, verses 20 through 44, and to think about this narrative from a different direction than we usually do. Of course, the commentary of Project Illumin is essential. Sharif's khutbah about Sulaiman and the esteemed ant is essential. My dear friend and colleague Bitska Marison's Substack entry about the Hoopoe witnessing toxicity from her Gift from the Heaven Substack is also incredibly enlightening, and I took a deep amount of inspiration from some of her observations. So let's consider this three-part narrative that everybody knows very well in Surah An-Naml. The beginning, Sulaiman and Dawood were given knowledge by God. Significant knowledge they are given by God. And what do they do with this knowledge? They consistently declare their gratitude. Some of this knowledge is ilm ladunni, some of this knowledge is direct from God, and some of it comes from his advisors and his officers. Sulaiman does what? Sulaiman regulates his internal knowledge and his external knowledge through the action of shukr, through gratitude. Sulaiman regulates his internal and external ilm through shukr. Connect this to your entrance into this month of Ramadan. First narrative, part 1. As Sulaiman's legions pass through the valley of the ants, he hears an ant imploring its colony to take cover to avoid the destruction of the ant's colony, the civilization. The ant speaks from very sound experience. Big and powerful entities rarely care to consider how they might be destructive towards smaller or even different ecosystems.